here we are live with the beautiful Avital Miller. Hello, Avital. Thank you for joining me this morning, or this evening in your case.
Hi, Michelle. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Today's show, guys and girls, is for awakening and emerging spiritual entrepreneurs. We bring global experts to you weekly, and we're here to help you thrive in energy, mindset, business, and all things spiritual. Today we're diving into the mind, body, and soul triad for spiritual connection in 3 key areas. And we are live. There will be time for some questions after each area is discussed. And if you're tuned into the recording, you can post your questions in the comments and we'll reply to each and every one of you, we promise. So for now, please turn off your zings and pings and allow yourself to drop into this beautiful space that we've provided and created just for you. Turn your undivided attention inwards and connecting to the highest possible outcome for your time with us. I am Michelle Reinhardt, Mindset, Energy and Healing Transformations, and the creator of Entrepreneurs Globally Unite, a divine hub for spiritual entrepreneurs. And our guest today is a beautiful woman who has journeyed from program management in Microsoft to award-winning author of upcoming book, Healing Happens. She's an international keynote speaker, and it's important to her to help people feel a touch of love in their hearts, joy in their spirits, and peace in their minds. She does this via many modalities, including yoga, healing, as a professional dance teacher, and offers energy healing and spiritual counselling through tarot readings. And she also masters pranic healing and her intuition. So without further ado, please welcome to our show, Avital Miller.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's funny listening to my own biography back to me and hearing all of these different things that I do. I do so many things because as we grow in life, we learn to enjoy everything. And it's that joy in life that keeps us happy, that keeps us whole, that keeps us healthy. And Michelle, I just want to thank you so much for having me here. The bits of connection that I've had with your group and with you have been very enlightening and very much a way of how to be strongly present in this world, how to go about it with the highest sense of consciousness. And I know that your listeners have a great sense of awareness already. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And yes, I agree. As we grow as a community, we grow collaboratively and collectively, and that is just my greatest honor to facilitate that space. So, Avital, we have had this chat a few times now, and we're delighted to unpack for our viewers 3 key areas. We're going to work with disease as a spiritual sign of progress. And we're going to find out who agrees with that and who doesn't, because there's a step of maturity in awakening in that sense in itself. We're also going to target alignment to your divine design, which sounds extremely juicy. And thirdly, but not at all least importantly, journeying through the spiritual awakening and how you would describe a spiritual awakening. So we've got 15 minutes for each of these topics just to allow for some Q&As at the end. But before we go any further, please would you be so kind as to share your story?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of people ask, Michelle, why is a program manager doing work with healing right now? Just to make a long story short, I realized that the program management at Microsoft was not my passion. Now, how many times have you done something where it wasn't your passion? It wasn't the thing that you wanted to do later on. Maybe you thought when you went into it, but then things shift. And this is a piece of learning to live from the heart, which is part of that healing journey. And when we talk about healing the mind, body, and the spirit, it's living our true essence and our full self. And what did that become next? Because that continues to shift and evolve, of course. But the next thing was being a yoga and fitness instructor, teacher trainer, fitness director, starting my own business, teaching 30 classes a week. I was nicknamed the Energizer Bunny, and I felt invincible. There I was, just 25 years old, and I started having issues with fatigue. The first reason this was devastating was because I never took a nap before, even in preschool. I just quietly laid on the cot waiting for nap time to be over.
Oh.
But the other thing that happened is when you have fatigue, it's not just being tired. It's your body weighing like a ton of bricks. It's your mind slowing down. It's losing the ability to speak, which is very odd again for a 25-year-old. And the next thing I'm seeing is my hair falling out. There were a lot of things that were happening really during that time. The other thing was muscles in my body turning to fat. Now remember, I'm teaching all these classes. I'm supposed to be stronger than my students, but there I am getting weaker. And of course, what am I going to do but just be scared I'm going to be out of the job? You know, Michelle, what if you couldn't type or you couldn't speak anymore? How would you feel about being able to manage the work that you're doing?
I don't know. I don't know what I would do. And I don't think you do until you're in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's exactly right. But what's the common thing we typically do if there's a physical challenge that we're having? We go to the doctor. And it takes a while sometimes with the doctor. Hi, Tammy. It took me quite some time to really understand what was going on. And I had to do a bit of research to get the doctors to test the right thing. Eventually, we came up with the diagnosis of Hashimoto's, an autoimmune disorder that causes hypothyroidism and hypoglycemia and allergies and quite a few things going on. So they put me on a high dosage of medication. And they sent me out the door saying, that's it for life. I thought, well, all right, if that's it for life, then let me at least make the most of it. I was young. Previously, I had a lot of energy, had a lot of things that I wanted to do in life. You know, how many of you just completely stop when somebody says no or you'll never? We've seen it in the past. Oprah Winfrey was fired from one of her first TV jobs. Steven Spielberg had trouble getting into school. Lady Gaga was told she didn't have the physique of a pop star. I know that all these are hard to believe. But what if those people listened? They didn't, right? Something just kept driving them forward. And for me, it was keeping my eye on what's my goal here. What are the actions that I'm trying to take of starting a new business and have all of these people in these classes relying on me. So I'm going to set up my life so I can continue to fulfill these things and support all of these people. I studied the physical layers of healing. Believe it, even a yoga and fitness expert does not know everything, and there is more to learn. And,
always.
Yeah, no kidding. And then the energetic layers, the mental layers, the spiritual layers. And that's where some like to say that I went from medication to meditation because I was able to dwindle off of the medicine. It was very real for me. It took a few years. It wasn't like an overnight miracle. But I have stories of those just about overnight miracles or a quick snap in a moment that started shifting things in another direction. So what I've been doing, Michelle, is sharing what these techniques are around the world, letting people know of their potential to heal, but meeting people who've been told they might die in a few months or a few hours, but I happen to meet them 10 years after that fatal pronouncement. Realizing that fatal pronouncements do not have to be our fate. So I really strongly, after hearing a few stories, it's not just me, to say this is more believable now. Of course, I could believe my own story, but how many other people? So I'm putting all of those stories into a book called Healing Happens, Stories of Healing Against All Odds. And this is where we start to get a lot of the key takeaways of what is happening repetitively. One of the things that we were talking about beforehand, Michelle, when we were saying, what should we talk about? And then what people voted on, what they want to hear about, is the idea that is a sign of spiritual progress. And one of my spiritual teachers was one of the first people who said this. Let's break this down into a few layers. First of all, just think about any time in life where you've had any form of abuse, any form of mistreatment, just someone not being nice to you. And maybe it was in a job, maybe it was in a friendship, maybe it was in a more romantic relationship or a marriage. For a time, you just sort of go along with it. Maybe you brush it off. You don't like it, but you kind of hope it changes. But then you get to a point where you say, no way, I cannot handle this anymore. I'm getting out of this situation. And in another way of looking at it, there was a point where you were okay, and there was a point where you were not okay, and you had the strength and the conviction to take an action to make it change, whether it meant going back to the person and healing it or walking away. And what happens in that gap? You could call that spiritual growth. You could call it emotional growth, mental growth, self-development. But it's that growth that is part of that spiritual progress. And then later on, a few months later, you look back at it and you think, my goodness, what was I thinking? I can't believe I was ever even in that situation or stuck with it for so long. Because at that point, you've grown even more out of whatever put you into that place originally. That's one of the easy ways of looking at where is that sign of spiritual progress in our own selves. But this happens as a society and a culture. This is a gruesome analogy that I'm giving you, but I'm giving this to you on purpose because it's gruesome today. It wasn't that one day. And one of those things is looking through my grandmother's photo album. There was a photo of a man who was hung because not too long ago, people actually went and watched public hangings.
Yeah.
But how many of us would even think to do that, would want to do that, right? If anyone's ever being executed because they've been a criminal and they're said that, they have the death penalty, how many of us want to watch that? Most of us do not want to see that happen. But at one time, it was a little more commonplace. So our society, our entire consciousness grows.
It was entertainment.
Yeah, imagine that. We watched Game of Thrones today. But I'm going to guess that a lot of people, even though it's exciting, it's still gruesome. It's still harsh. For most of us, that's not the way we behave today.
No. Well, certainly not in the Western cultures.
Yeah, exactly. But we probably did at one point. But here's another analogy that my spiritual teacher gave, which is people way up in the Andes in Argentina. They eat a lot of, yes, it's gruesome, Tammy, but up in the Andes in Argentina, they eat a lot of beef. And they also grow, long lives. They stay alive until maybe they're 100 years old. For a lot of us, especially in US, we have a lot of people getting heart attacks from overeating on meat. And so a lot of us would say that eating too much meat is not good for the health. You're not going to live a long life. So let's say we stick with that assumption. And the question is, how are those people able to live a long life? What my spiritual teacher said was just that those are people that are living a more even life. And that may or may not be true about them. I don't personally know, but it's just an example for an analogy that they're living an even keel life. So they're not going through spiritual progress. But let me explain this in another way so you can understand a little bit more of the science. Anybody remember science class? Yeah, you can type yes in your chat if you remember science class. One of the things that we learned that all matter is made of energy. That means that our bodies are made of energy. And the way I like to think about it is that our physical body is a form of energy. Our mind could be a form of energy. Our emotions could be a form of energy. Our soul could be a form of energy. All energy has a vibration or a frequency wave. if it's going to line up and coexist with the same being, they would have the same frequency wave. They would be able to move together. Energy is always in motion. And let's say we change our diet, then we change the frequency wave of our physical body. Let's say we go do a lot of meditation and spiritual practices. Then we change the frequency wave, maybe of our soul or our spirit. I believe our souls always stay the same, but it's what unravels and opens it up more. That frequency wave starts to change. Maybe we do some affirmations, or we go to some self-development programs, and our mind or our emotions shift, changes the frequency wave, right? You do one or the other of these, and you have part of you going like this, and part of you going like this, just because of the change. And the body is going to want to re-assimilate back together so that it can all move together at the same frequency wave. Part of how it shows up that there's a difference in the frequency wave is through disease. And let's say that your mind or your spirit shifts first. The body is going to say, hey, slow down. I need to catch up. It takes me longer to change. You've just had a change. Now I need to change. And part of that is a manifestation of a sickness, to literally just hold us back and rest and allow everything to assimilate together. And let's take this from another direction, but let's say that you changed your diet. I had one MD and acupuncturist, who was both in one, who I was working with, and mostly I just changed my diet. After a couple weeks, went to see him, was telling him about my personal life. And he said, first I said that, I didn't react to that situation like I normally do. And he goes, oh, good, your kidney's working better. And I said, I didn't get angry when that happened like I normally would. And he goes, oh, good, your liver's working better. You see, our emotions are tied in with our diet. And so let's say we change our physical body, then it is that emotional body that needs to catch up. And what's the dark night of the soul? The dark night of the soul is pieces of our emotions or our mental state that are still existing within us while we've undergone a change in another sense on that non-physical layer. And we're noticing the difference because some of that's still lingering, but that's no longer what wants to be us. And it's depressing that some of that still exists within us. That's when we go through the dark night of the soul. So that's also actually a sign of spiritual progress. I was going through that a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago, and I never experienced anything so extreme. And I went to one of my healer's spiritual teachers, psychic, very, very amazing. I told her what was going on, and she goes, yes, that's a sign of your spiritual progress. It blew me away. It's like, how could that be? I feel like I'm the worst person in the world and I have no talents. And you're telling me that's because of growth. Because shortly after that, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Michelle, where even just you're down for a little bit and then all of a sudden it's gone and you feel better than you've ever felt before.
I agree completely. I feel that it depends on how we approach it and assimilate it in our mind, as in terms of how we grow through it. Because you can allow it to take you back down in a dark spiral, or you can do as you did, you went and sought some support, or you can just say, okay, well, I resonate with what you said a lot before, because I say a lot to my clients, it's time to draw a line in the sand. You choose whether you walk over that line or you walk back. Mm-hmm. For me, I'm never ever going back. There's no fun in that from where I've come from. So it's my journey and my mission and my purpose to take as many people over that line with me.
Yeah.
And yes, it is a sign of spiritual progress. Everything is that feels good.
Yeah. Yes.
And bad.
Yeah.
It depends on how you take it on from there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And for people who might be going through any of those challenges, one of the other things that she said is, in a way, it's breaking ourselves down to rebuild ourselves anew. It was in that moment that she made me aware of all these things that I wasn't feeling so tortured that was happening to me. What I really feel is that it's time for us to stop feeling bad that we're sick, because that only makes it worse. Because of course our body does not feel good when we're sick, but let's not beat ourselves up as if we did something wrong to get there. But realize that what's happening is a growth, and an asking literally of our soul, saying, hey, it's time for the rest of you to grow and to align more deeply with the true essence and nature of who you are. And from that moment, it was all uphill, because I just would say to my guru, like, okay, rebuild me however you want me to be. I surrender my life completely and allow that to be anything. The ideals that I had lived my life around were completely torn down because of information that I was just simply reading in some amazing books. It was in the Enneagram specifically, if any of you have ever studied that. But it's very fascinating about all of the different personality types and where that comes from and how to work with that in a very interesting roadmap. But I didn't need to read much of that to get the idea that what I thought was greatness was really just another path in life, and no path in life needed to be greater or worser than another. These are part of the beauties of the layers that we can break down. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And I wanted to make one more point about the idea of disease being a sign of spiritual progress. But if any of you have questions, then please start popping those in and I'll answer them in a moment. Or if any more comments as well. Any experiences that you've had related to what I'm saying. Some of you are already sharing them. I appreciate that. And one other thing, just to take this to a deeper level and also looking at the bigger consciousness in the whole of what's happening on this planet. But to ask the question, why do more people have cancer today than ever before? Is there something really different that we're doing today that is causing that? Or is it a matter of our consciousness shifting to the point where the emotions that cancer is tied into, we are now saying be done with that? So some would say that cancer can be tied into shame, into guilt. It's a lot of women having cancer, right? More than men. And you could think of women and breast cancer, and that's where the heart is. And so we're looking at women's connection with their own heart and with really living in a space of love and not hiding, no shame. All the abuse that women have carried over the years, it's part of saying that's done. Enough with that. There's other things that cancer can be linked into, especially depending on the type, but that's one example. Another one is Hashimoto's, and that causes hypothyroidism. And you know that about 1/3 of women actually get hypothyroidism or thyroid issues?
Yeah. I get a lot of that, yeah.
Yeah, this has to do with the throat, and because it's in the throat, where the gland is, and the throat chakra is about communication. And I started interviewing women who have had these challenges. And I asked them, do you tell anybody about how you suffer from this? All the different ways that it affects you, or even that this is going on with you? The reason I had to ask, because if so many women had it, why had I never heard of it before I got it? Today, this was almost 10 years ago. So today it is more well known. And there's more ideas out there about how to heal it, or even that it's possible to heal. Whereas back then, none of that was talked about. And what I realized was that actually, let me take you to another layer. Because part of what causes this disease is actually our reaction to what's happening in the environment. It's toxins in the air. It's toxins in the food that we eat. It's things that are being overprocessed. It's the chemicals and products that we clean our homes and our bodies and our clothes with. And all of that is actually what's affecting the body. You guys can catch me later and I can break those things down a little bit more to explain the layers of the possibilities of how this disease manifests. And then what happens is in a way that women, again, are a lot of the people who are being affected by this. And it's more commonly that women are empaths, that women are sensing what is going on and feeling it around them. Right, Michelle? You're smiling.
Right. I'm sure we're all smiling.
Yeah. Well, then imagine, though, that we have been creating something in our environment that's harmful to our own selves. And if we speak about it, then we let others know of the harm that is coming to us. And so the disease that almost it makes you think that this is not working, it's a call for you to go in the opposite direction, to speak out about what you sense, so that this world can be more supportive and more healing of each other, so that we can have all of these amazing inventions that we have, but in a way where our bodies know how to adapt and work with it, where we can really create a more supportive system. And it comes out more because it's time to say it's time for us to make a change in how we use the world.
Which leads us beautifully into the second point, which is alignment to your divine design.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we do go any further, I can't seem to get these comments up on the screen. So just a big welcome to everyone that's joined us. And Teray, yes, it's a beautiful thing to find on a Monday morning. So please, I can read your comments. If you have any questions or any suggestions as to how I can get them on the screen, they were working before. But that's okay. So alignment to your divine design, can you explain that? And I know we've got to keep the time rolling along, or we could talk about this all day, that we're all on schedules for the day.
Yeah. Well, just to make a note, though, I am seeing the messages pop up, but just the beginning of them. So if people keep the messages short, I will be able to see them. I don't know how quickly from the time you write them to the time I see them it happens, but feel free to keep sharing. And I know, Michelle, you'll keep looking at them. Alignment to divine design. What I want to do is look at that in a couple different ways. One of the things to understand is that the rules change in life. And what we're going to do is tune into what all those rules are. And I think the old rules still apply, but then there's also new rules. A lot of people are talking about how people have shifted from being in the 3D world to the 5D world. I prefer not to create too many of these definitions, but if it helps to think about it that way, we can start with the 3D world right in front of us. What we understand from science about what our bodies are mostly made of. So do you know the main component of our bodies? We talked about energy before, but we're going to talk about a different element now.
Water.
Yes, water. And water is made of?
Oxygen.
Oxygen and?
Atoms.
Okay, yes. Good, Terai, you put water there. What's the chemical component of water? You guys can also type it in your chat. H2O. Good. So we have the O, we have the oxygen, and we have the hydrogen. We can get oxygen from breathing air, and we can get hydrogen from what's the biggest source of hydrogen? That's the other hard question I'm going to ask. I won't ask any hard questions after this. Biggest source of hydrogen in our world.
You've got the show.
I know. It's all me. Okay.
I haven't, my science is shot from school days.
Oh, yeah. No, that's okay. I wonder if I want to give you a hint or just tell you. But what happens in the afternoon, and you go outside, you're going to feel the most of this thing that has tons of hydrogen, right? Midday. You know what it is?
No.
It's okay. You're gonna say, oh yeah, when I tell you. It's the sun.
Okay.
This is what feeds our plants, right? There's water, there's air, and there's the hydrogen from the sun. Good, Sarai. Yes, the sun. And so that means that our bodies are going to do well with things that are most closely related to the sun and to the oxygen, because that's the source of what we're made of. Now, there are people who are actually called breatharians and completely live off of the sun and off of doing breathing exercises. That's a lifestyle in itself. So I don't recommend just going out and trying that on your own. It takes quite a bit of work. It's nice for the body because it doesn't have to process any food. So it takes less energy if you know how to take in everything from the sun, from the air. But let's just look at plants. Plants, when you take them right off of the tree or out of the ground, that's when they're going to have the most water in them. That's when they're closest to how they were with the sun. When we overcook things, when we dry things, when we process things, we're dehydrating it. We're taking it further and further from the sun. What happens when we put something dehydrated into our body? It either doesn't know what it is and starts to attack it, or that thing leaches the water out of your cells. Then your cells become dehydrated. Then your body doesn't know what your cells are because it's not like your body, because it's not with water. And that's how your body starts attacking its own self and causing autoimmune disorders. This is what one of my doctors explained to me. That was the acupuncturist MD. So what we want to do is keep a lot of our strong energy going by having those foods that are really, really vibrant. And this is, again, my personal theory with meat and why meat can be a challenge if we're overdoing it. Because here's the sun, here's the plants that we eat, here's the animal that we eat. The animal eats other animals, or then it eventually goes down to the plants, which came from the sun. But we're over here, and if we're eating lots and lots and lots of animal, then we're another step removed from what has a lot of the water element for us. And that's why I feel meats also come with a lot of toxins. There's this interesting thing as I was going through my healing process, and I gave up meat, and I started to feel really, really good. And then I healed from the Hashimoto's and the hypothyroidism, but I still had pain in my ankles. And I'm a dancer, so I could feel it. And I was doing point, and that's a lot of pressure on the ankles. They were just always hurting. And finally, after one of the interviews for my book, hearing once again the impacts of egg and dairy, I wasn't having dairy, but the eggs, that was another reminder. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try this now. I'm going to give up eggs. I really like them, but let me try this. And after a month, I don't know at what point my ankles stopped hurting, but after a month, I realized my ankles weren't hurting. Today, I eat a little bit of eggs, but not so much that it's going to build up the toxin, but I enjoy the eggs. So we don't have to completely get rid of anything that we enjoy. But this is just the physical layer. Any questions about that?
No specific questions. So is there any particular layer that's more important in alignment to our divine design, or are they physical, mental, spiritual, equal?
It's going to depend on each person.
Yeah.
And I'll say it this way. For me personally, and I didn't explain this earlier, but when I worked on the physical, the mental, and the emotional layers, it steadied me. So I didn't have the ups and downs, but I was still on medicine. When I started to meditate, but not just meditation for relaxation or for the mind, I was really imagining what a lot of us call God. My own definition of God, the divine spirit with me and making this life in this world happen. So that something beyond physical. And then I started needing less medication. Now, there's a story of Dr. Brooke Goldner, who had lupus. It was so extreme that for 2 years in high school, she was on chemo. And
wow.
She thought that she would never have a long life. Nobody would ever want to get married to her because of that, and she could never have kids. So she never imagined herself in a white dress. She is studying to become a doctor, though. She wants to help other people. And lo and behold, she meets this beautiful man. He proposes after a month. That's how quickly they fell in love. And then she tells him, about all these challenges, and he stops for a moment, but then he says, okay, I still want to do this because at least a little bit of time with you is better than none at all. And then she says, well, if I'm going to have a wedding and wear a white dress, I want to look good. He worked with MTV stars to help them lose weight quickly whenever they had a shooting coming up. So for their film shoots. And so she said, okay, well, put me on your diet. And he puts her on her diet, and she says, but I don't eat meat. I'm a vegetarian. And his diet had meat in it. So what ended up being was a vegan diet. And she went on the vegan diet. She looked great. They're getting ready to go to Hawaii for the wedding. She does her routine tests, and they can't find any lupus in her system. None.
Wow.
It's been about 11 years. No lupus. She has 2 beautiful kids. Everyone's fully healthy and happy.
There's many stories out there.
Yeah.
We've got a beautiful guest sitting here listening, Eloise Hare, who has a miraculous story of self-healing as well, and she's been a guest on our show previously. So we're aware, and Tammy, I agree, small doses of yum, right? Yes. We are human. Yes, we are human. We need to have balance. We need to have fun. We need lots of light and laughter, and those vibrations of joy and happiness. They bring more of the same.
Yes. And Eloise, you can reach out to me later. It'll still be a few months, but I'm going to be interviewing more people for my podcast with stories like yours. So if you would like to be interviewed for that, and anyone else listening, you can reach out to me, and I'll be interviewing you in time. It would be wonderful. But let's take this another deeper layer. Because yes, you could look at the physical, emotional, mental, what's happening in your life. So some people, and the way that I think about it is, there's our physical divine design of how we're born, what we're naturally made of. But our divine design changes. I mentioned earlier, at one point in life, being in a job with a certain amount of abuse is okay, and then it didn't seem like abuse, and then one day it seems like abuse, and you move on from that. Sometimes we change careers, and those shift, and we shift with that. And there's people completely healed by changing their jobs, by moving to a new city, by changing out of a relationship, or being in a new one. These are people with cancer who were told they were on their deathbed. Very simply, like realizing what your new divine design is for your lifestyle. And that's one of the ways that people heal. The other thing is to have a sense of intuition, and almost letting intuition become our blueprint. Maureen Bell was diagnosed with cancer. When we get to our third topic, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her story, but I'll say this piece right now. Because before her last round of chemo, she was only given chemo because they thought it might prolong her life a little bit, but they didn't expect her to live much longer. Finally, before that last round, she decided she was going to research what was in the chemo drug. She realized that it was made from a plant that she planted everywhere in her adult life. In other words, she loved the plant. So here we are when we have chemo, we're like, yay, it's killing the cancer cells. But we're also sad that it is creating other effects in our body that are toxic and cause things like the weight loss, like the hair loss, weak immunity, lack of hunger. And she was experiencing all of those things up to that point. But she went into that round then realizing this was something that she loved, that she was putting into her body. And in a way, she dialogued with the chemo. Normally, it would take 10 hours for all of the chemo drugs to get into her body. It only took 3. Normally, her urine would turn blood red. It stayed its normal color, right? Instead of losing hair, she was starting to grow back in her hair. So that's the first thing to remember, is that even though I'm telling you all this and I'm saying what's good for your body and what's not, the deeper thing happens when we shift our relationship with everything in our environment and everything that we put into our body. The second thing that happened with her after that was using her intuition as to what to eat. She developed a greater relationship with her body and realized the connection between her soul and her body. And in a way, her body having its own soul.
Yeah.
And so these are two beings that are combined. And remember, I talked about those energy layers and each of them having a vibration. And they need to figure out how to match in order to really coexist well together. Otherwise, they're going to want to split.
Yeah.
They want to separate again. So, there she is. She's having these dreams of her body and her soul walking down two different paths. And then all of a sudden, I'll tell you why at the next phrase, all of a sudden, she's seeing it combine back in one. She was learning to listen to her body as to what to eat. And this was not about having a vegan diet. Whatever it was, if it was meat, if it was cheese, maybe bread, she didn't detail all the things, but she did say it was not a vegan diet.
Pretty sure it wasn't chocolate and wine.
Maybe. Those are good for our spirit, right?
Well, that's right.
All that sounds good. And just, if you want to relate it back to a physical layer, though, if your body is very weak, it's extremely low on iron. You might want to eat a big chunk of meat so you can just quickly get a lot of iron in you. Another way of looking at this, for Goldner's diet, it's mostly green smoothies. That's raw food. That is very hard for some people to process. It's also not very grounding. And for somebody who's been traveling a lot, who has trouble focusing, and Ayurveda, which is what I also studied during the time that I was studying everything, it's an ancient Indian science where it tries to understand what your natural balance of your body is and then help you return to that for your own individual self. So sometimes cooked is better than raw. You just, again, don't overcook so you don't lose the nutrients. But sometimes for some people, cooked is better than raw. It depends on the season, the time of year, right? If you're sick or if you're healthy, sometimes you want things that are just easier for the body to handle. Maybe you want things that grow into the ground, that's grounding, or things that are heavier, because otherwise you feel like you're light and you're going to fly away. Those are all different examples. How many of us have the time to continually go get very specific blood tests or study everything about Ayurveda or all these different sciences? We don't, right? But we all have time to tune into our intuition, to develop a relationship with our body. And really, one of the best ways to tune into intuition is through meditation, because that's where we learn to listen. One of the quick tricks you can do as you meditate is look up at this, what we call the spiritual eye. Another way that we think about it is just simply when you're happy, everything is raised up. You're looking upwards. You're joyful. And so if you have a question in mind, should I eat this or not? Literally, eyes gaze upwards with the eyes closed. And imagine that question is sitting right there. Hold one answer in there, or try to hold one answer in there. So when we're in the conscious state, the eyes look forward. When we're in the subconscious state, the eyes look down. If the answer is not super conscious, then you're going to look forward or down. So if the answer is not the best one for you, you're going to look forward or down. You're going to have a hard time even keeping your eyes up. It's very subtle, but if you meditate more, you'll be able to train yourself to feel that difference and that sensation.
And for those that are listening on the recording that can't actually see the visual here, we're talking about the third eye, the space in between your two eyes, above your bridge of your nose, between your eyebrows.
Mm-hmm. Yep, right between the eyebrows.
So moving through, and I know we could do a whole topic on diet, nutrition and Ayurveda and lots of different things. Now we're on to point 3 and I hate watching the timer running down, but it is. Yes. Journeying through spiritual awakening. Mm-hmm. I have my own version of what a spiritual awakening is. I certainly have my own story in alignment with that. How would you describe spiritual awakening, Avital?
Yeah, and I will do that partially with Maureen's story as well, and what happened that created that shift in the moment from her. What I also want to do first is define what I consider to be spiritual. What I consider to be spiritual is learning to align with your true essence, with your divine design, as the term that we were using, with your purpose, and also learning to fully live it, to fully be present with it. It is adapting and feeling more of a sense of peace, calm, energy, joy, wisdom, light, sound. All of those things are also what people define as God, for people who like that word. And then the word awakening, what I want to say is that it doesn't have to be having these visions of all these other life forms, being able to predict everything in the future, knowing that you have the ultimate intuition. What I want to say to awakening is really learning better to adapt to the life around you, but having a greater awareness and understanding. Another way I'm going to say that is that you can perceive life through more than just the five senses. You hear of the sixth sense. I'm going to venture that there's potentially an unlimited number of senses that we could be perceiving life through. When we establish that greater awareness, we can live in this world knowing that with less attachment, with less pull, with more ease, more grace, with a different perspective. We can go into everything and enjoy it and be fine with that enjoyment. Those are all things that happen with spiritual awakening. And what happened with Maureen Bell? Just to recap, she was diagnosed specifically with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was given only 6 to 8 weeks to live and told that they could give her some chemo to prolong her life, but that was it. And 2 months later, she is disintegrating, just as the doctor said. 85 pounds, bedridden, hospice, morphine patches, oxygen tubes, not hungry. She's not eating anymore. And they expect her to die soon, so her son comes to visit to say goodbye. But he remembers a couple things. One is that his mom was an energy healer and knew a lot about healing and what's beyond the physical body. And two, she was a very strong single mom who raised him. Remembering those things, he asks her, why didn't you fight? Why didn't you fight? And he left her place with the words ringing in her head. Oh my goodness. Why didn't I fight? Why not? Do I have a choice? And really what was going to happen that night was her thinking that, okay, I've said goodbye to my son. Now I can surrender to death. There she is, ready to surrender. But something different happens. Also remember, she was having those dreams up to that point of it would seem like herself splitting into two. And what she realized was one path was the body and one path was the soul. So after her son leaves and while she's asking this question, can I fight? Do I have a choice? What happened is what a lot of people call a near-death experience, where she felt enveloped in a beautiful light, in what a lot of us might call divine, unconditional love, in a great sense of peace. She felt herself removed from her physical body and could look down to her physical body. She heard this beautiful voice saying, choice. Choice, yes, you have a choice. And the choice was also to continue walking a separate path from her body or rejoining with her body. She looks down at her body and asks this voice, but how could I go back in this frail body? And the voice says, well, why don't you ask the body if it wants to? So she asks the body, and the body says, sure, let's give it a try. And she comes, back in, wakes up in the morning. She calls her sister in who'd been taking care of her, just completely sobbing, telling her sister what happened. And they knew things were going to change from there. And it was in that moment that she didn't feel physical pain in her body. And she was still weak, but she felt hunger for the first time. That's when she came up intuitively with the idea to research what was in the chemo drug. In that sense, because she felt healed. She felt like she didn't need to go through the treatment. But I think what she learned about going through the treatment and it not being toxic for her body, for us to be able to see that, when you shift your relationship with something, that's another level of awakening and awareness that we go through. the doctors were wondering if she had the placebo drug because her health was improving when normally you would expect it not to.
Yeah, I have I've heard Maureen's story several times, and it was inspiring for me when we were walking through my mother's journey with cancer. Unfortunately, she lost that particular journey. I've always said she vowed that she would never be beaten by cancer, and she wasn't. Her body let her down, but her mind and her soul never did. But yeah, there is always choice. We always have choice.
Yeah.
And intuition definitely is the key. There are some beautiful questions that comments that have been put in down here from our lovely guests.
Yeah.
And yes, you girls are all on board with this.
I just want to say one thing to what you're saying, and then I'll take those questions with this idea of choice and also with your mother passing, because what Maureen stresses is that it's really about understanding your connection with your body and creating the communication and making that decision as to whether or not you two are going to continue in this form together or not. So dying doesn't necessarily mean failing that. It just means that the body is decided that it is done being in that form. And when your soul can create that communication with the body and accept those decisions or create a joint decision, then you can move on more gracefully and more peacefully through that.
I agree completely. And I must say that there are a lot of people walking around with utter distaste and disgust to their body. Mm-hmm. Nobody likes being spoken to or treated with disrespect.
Yeah.
And if we're doing that to ourselves, that disconnect is so profound, it is going to cause distress.
Yeah. Oh, we're way meaner to ourselves than anybody else is. You think about any friends with any friends that say to you what you say to yourself?
Avital, Tammy's posted something of interest into the comments there. With this idea of choice, it brings up the idea that before we come into this world, we've already chosen our lives.
Yes.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Yes. And you know what else I think, which is really fascinating? Because I think we come in with a choice as to how we want to live our life and what our purpose is, what experience we want to have, what we want to learn from it. But you know what else I think? And we create contracts with people. We say, we're going to go in, even people that are your soulmates, and you have a horrible experience with them in this life because you create a contract to say, will you behave rudely to me so that I can learn from that and then never, have somebody behave that way to me again? It's a lot of the people that we have the biggest challenges with are sometimes our greatest loves. But another side to that, which I find fascinating, is that I believe that we have a choice in any moment. So any of those contracts that we created before we came in, any of those ideas of how we thought we were going to live our life, in any moment, we can change that decision. My guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, tore up his astrology chart. The astrology chart is based off of the mapping of the planets when we came in. And if you were to say there's a choice and you come in at a certain moment so that you could be a certain form, he says that we do not have to be tied down to any of those things.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're answering Tammy's questions as fast as she can get them out. So well done. You two are very much on song. Now, Avital, I would like to offer you this opportunity to share with our guests and our viewers and our listeners to come a little bit more about where they can find you for further information. And also I believe you have a link for them, which I'll put in the comments, guys and girls, to a free gift.
Yes. Okay, so if you want the free gift, then what you do is you go to healinghappensbook.com. And remember I mentioned the book Healing Happens. Maureen's story is in there. Dr. Brooke Goldner's story is in there. There's quite a few other amazing stories in there. Everyone that I interviewed, they're all health and healing experts from the East and the West disciplines of healing and medical science. And it covers the span of diseases. So I mentioned cancer, I mentioned lupus, Lyme, cerebral palsy, MS, bipolar, blindness, all of those things are discussed in the book. So whatever issue you have going on with you, it's likely that that's also touched. Or if you know somebody who is, I find it really important that we share these stories with other people. You might know people who are having challenges, but if they don't, they might know people who are.
Absolutely.
So I highly recommend sharing that website, and you will automatically get a free section of the book. After that, that will link you to the GoFundMe campaign. Because if you do want to reserve the book, that's the one way to do that at this point. I'm looking at it being launched in the fall. Beautiful. Thanks for posting that, Michelle. That's gofundme.com/healing-happens-book. And then you get all sorts of other rewards on that GoFundMe campaign. One of them being time on my membership site. There's over 20 guided meditations that I've created with a very universal sense. But they all have a goal, whether it's glowing health and vitality, or it's success, or world peace, or just figuring out your own path to peace. So those are a lot of fun to follow along with. I will also give people the opportunity to buy into the companion online course that will come out with the book. And then people can also be listed as a sponsor on my website with the link or on my book. So there's quite a few gifts on there. You can also get one-on-one time with me. And remember at the beginning, Michelle mentioned the whole slew of things I do. What I like to say is that I do healing breakthrough consultations. And so we can talk and figure out what's the best path for you, so that you can go into that process. If you do go to the GoFundMe campaign, there's a lot of resources on there that direct you to where you can start reading some of the other stories from the book and listening to some of the YouTubes.